It's easier to say, oh, we're gonna show everybody that we know this league is good with or without Caitlin Clark. We're gonna prove it. But once you talk to your owner buddies and they say, look how much we made. I mean, Indiana Fever came to town. Look how much we're making, right? Once Renee Montgomery and Sheila Johnson talk to the owner of the Las Vegas Aces, talk to the owner of the Chicago Sky, and they say, hey, what was that gate looking like? Oh, damn. That's a lot of money. Indiana had 9 road games moved to larger arenas last year, but just 4 so far for 2026. WNBA teams are moving more games to different arenas this upcoming season, but Caitlin Clark and the Indiana Fever have significantly fewer of those games. The WNBA's regular season schedule announced Wednesday, including 19 games.
Dropping from 9 all the way down to 4 is the kind of shift that absolutely demands a deeper second look. Last season, Indiana's road schedule quietly turned into the league's biggest traveling spectacle, with multiple games moved into NBA-sized arenas because standard venues simply couldn't absorb the Caitlin Clark-driven demand. This year, that once booming pipeline contracts to just 4 Fever road games in larger buildings, even as the league as a whole increases arena relocations from 15 to 19. If the league's messaging is louder than ever about growth, momentum, and rising demand, the numbers begin to feel selectively applied. Public-facing explanations usually fall back on caution, with Clark's groin injury last season becoming the convenient cover story, a narrative tool that reframes reduced venue commitments as prudent planning rather than a quiet recalibration.
Atlanta Dream each moved 1 game against Indiana last year, but none for the upcoming season. The New York Liberty, Portland Fire, Mercury, Valkyries, and Minnesota Lynx are already in NBA arenas, removing any need to move games for bigger crowds. Is part of this due to injuries? Well, they would like you to believe that, I think. They would like you to believe, oh, well, she got injured last year. We don't want to move. We don't want to commit to it.
But the real-world stress test already happened, and it answered the question more clearly than any talking point ever could. When her availability changed, the crowds did not vanish, the demand did not soften, and those games still drew, still sold, still proved the Fever were the league's biggest road magnet by a wide margin. Indiana's road attendance stood as the clear outlier at roughly 15,184 per game, nearly 4,000 more than any other team, and Clark herself appeared in only 3 of the relocated games before the injury. So the issue is no longer whether teams can sell tickets without her on the floor, because they already proved they could. The real question is why the one team that consistently generated the strongest road demand is now being given fewer chances to scale that demand. And when you look behind the curtain, these venue decisions don't materialize by accident. They flow from ownership groups, front offices, and league stakeholders who carry their own preferences about what they want the WNBA to look like.
Part owner of the Atlanta Dream. Names like Sheila Johnson, part owner of the Washington Mystics. Sheila Johnson, the same person who threw a fit that Caitlin Clark was named Time Magazine's Woman Athlete of the Year. And she said, why give it to Caitlin Clark? Let's give it to the whole entire league. If you ask me, this is a subtle play from folks like Sheila Johnson and Renee Montgomery. Because at the end of the season, they decreased the amount of Fever games that have been moved to bigger arenas. Yet in totality, they increased the league.
So the deeper question becomes whose story actually gets centered when these decisions are made. Look first at Atlanta and Washington. Renee Montgomery sits within the Atlanta Dream ownership group, while Sheila Johnson is a part owner of the Washington Mystics, and she is the same executive who publicly pushed back when Time magazine highlighted Caitlin Clark, arguing that recognition should be spread more evenly across the league. Last season, Atlanta shifted 1 Indiana game into State Farm Arena. This year, they shifted none, and Washington followed the exact same pattern with 1 moved game last season and 0 this year. Connecticut only sharpens the pattern further, as the Sun took a Clark game to TD Garden, the one now permanently linked in public memory to the injury. Yet nothing comparable remains on this year's schedule. If the league truly believed the Fever were the safest, most reliable bet for sustained demand, logic suggests at least 1 marquee arena shift would still be on the calendar, not this quiet, unmistakable retreat.
You see how massive the season was? You see how much of a success it was this year? And we only had Caitlin Clark. See, we don't really need her. I told you guys we were going to do this without her. Interesting. The decrease in moved Fever games comes after Caitlin Clark played in just 13 games last season. Clark appeared in just 3 of the 9 moved road games, including July 15th against the Connecticut Sun at TD Garden. Clark injured her groin in the 4th quarter of that game and missed the remainder of the season. The Fever remained the league's biggest attendance draw last year, averaging 15,000.
What makes this pattern even more revealing is that the dip isn't isolated to a single franchise at all. Chicago and Dallas each moved 2 games into larger venues last season, and this year both are cut back to just 1. Yet the league is clearly not abandoning arena shifts altogether. Toronto's expansion team alone has 5 games spread across different venues, including dates in Montreal and Vancouver, a clear signal that the league will still reshuffle buildings whenever it wants to maximize attention, crowd size, and market momentum. Put it all together and the math becomes impossible to ignore. Total moved games rise from 15 to 19, while Fever-related moves collapse from 9 to 4, a split that wouldn't exist if logistics or a general pullback were the real explanation. Instead, the tactic is expanding while its application is narrowing, and Indiana stands out as the lone outlier moving in the opposite direction. Zoom in further on the 4 big venue dates Indiana actually kept: July 5th against Las Vegas, August 8th against Chicago, August 18th against Toronto, and August 20th against Dallas, and a new layer appears because every one of them sits well past the season's opening stretch, long after cameras are loudest and early momentum peaks. Last year, the league leaned hard into early demand, stacking arena upgrades near the front of the calendar while the Caitlin Clark spotlight burned at maximum intensity. This year, the approach reads differently, almost like a deliberate attempt to shape the early season narrative inside smaller buildings first, then roll out the larger arenas later, once the initial frenzy fades and attention has to be deliberately reignited.
If I'm an owner of an NBA arena, if I'm in charge of selecting what events gets put in these arenas, well, without a CBA deal reached, why would I want to start already Xing out dates with potential WNBA games, when I can keep those dates open for when a Jonas Brothers come to town, when a Taylor Swift comes to town, when a Luke Bryan or whoever come to town? Why would I start Xing out these dates? I wouldn't. It's not smart. I want to keep those dates open.
There is also a quieter, very practical incentive hiding in plain sight that helps explain the timing. The collective bargaining agreement is still unfinished, and the 2026 season carries real uncertainty around when it will actually begin, and arena managers hate uncertainty more than almost anything. If you control an NBA building, you would much rather keep prime dates flexible for events that guarantee revenue, touring concerts, major shows, anything with a proven sellout floor, because flexibility is leverage. If the calendar opens up later, you can always slide in a WNBA date, but what you do not want is committing early, and then dealing with reschedules, refunds, or dead inventory if the season timeline shifts. That is why timing matters just as much as the raw number of arena moves, because it is not only fewer Fever upgrades, it is fewer that are pushed deeper into the year, when those dates are easier to treat as optional inventory instead of a must-book centerpiece. Even recent precedent shows how fluid this process really is, as the Chicago Sky announced in February 2025 that they were moving their first 2 games against Indiana to the United Center, despite the schedule being released back in December, a reminder that many of the biggest venue upgrades don't happen at launch but later, once teams run the numbers and realize the original plan undersold demand. That pattern showed up clearly and unmistakably last year, and it matters more now than it did then. Atlanta didn't lock anything in early. In March, they corrected course and shifted their May 22nd matchup with Indiana into State Farm Arena, the Hawks building, and Dallas followed roughly a week later by moving a Fever game into American Airlines Center. Those weren't baked-in plans, they were adjustments driven by demand, real-time responses once the numbers made the upside impossible to ignore. That is why the quote from the Fever side carries weight, because when a team spokesperson says they can't speak for what other teams will do, but that opponents can still adjust venues before the season begins, it's effectively an open door, and a quiet acknowledgement that the calendar isn't as final as fans assume. The subtext is straightforward. Teams will keep monitoring ticket demand and sponsor interest, and some will pivot once the financial reality becomes too loud, and that creates an uncomfortable tension for certain ownership groups. There are influential voices who have spent the past year insisting the WNBA's growth is bigger than any single player, that it was always headed here, and that Clark merely arrived at the perfect moment, a framing that's understandable because it protects legacy. It's left open for possible bigger events, and if nobody claims those dates, fine, then a couple Indiana Fever games can always be slid in later, but until then the calendar stays deliberately flexible. That is why the league's current approach feels like a careful balancing act, with some owners eager to protect the message that the WNBA's rise isn't tied to any single player, while every owner still has to answer to budgets, sponsorship targets, and season ticket economics. When those numbers are staring you in the face, ideology gets expensive fast, so what's unfolding looks like a compromise that doubles as a live test. Keep the early schedule conservative, call it caution, planning, or prudence, and then watch what happens in the first wave of games. If attendance holds steady in smaller venues, leadership gets the talking point it wants, the claim that demand is structural rather than individual, and the league can continue presenting growth as a broad movement. If attendance dips and money starts slipping away, the pivot is already baked into the calendar. We've seen how quickly teams can announce late-cycle venue changes, and that becomes the quiet safety valve, the ability to restore big arena Indiana dates without ever admitting the experiment failed. The risk, though, is that last season already proved the demand wasn't fragile at all, because even with Clark missing most of the year, Indiana still generated the largest road crowds in the league by a wide margin. Those seats were sold and those upgrades were justified before anyone knew an injury would alter the season, which is exactly what makes the current bet feel unnecessary. The schedule remains open for bigger events, and if those dates go unclaimed, a few Indiana Fever games can slide in later, keeping flexibility front and center. That's why the league's approach feels like a careful balancing act. Some owners want to protect the narrative that the WNBA's rise isn't tied to any single player, but every owner must also answer to budgets, sponsorship targets, and season ticket economics. When the numbers are staring you down, ideology gets expensive fast. What you're seeing is a compromise that doubles as a test. Start the season conservatively, call it caution or planning, and monitor early games. If attendance holds in smaller venues, leadership claims the demand is structural, not individual, allowing the league to present growth as a broad, sustainable movement. If attendance dips and revenue starts slipping, the calendar already has built-in flexibility, allowing teams to restore big arena Indiana dates without admitting the experiment failed. A quiet hedge that protects the narrative. Yet the risk feels unnecessary because last season proved demand wasn't fragile. Even with Clark missing most of the year, Indiana still drew the largest road crowds in the league by a wide margin, selling out seats and justifying upgrades before anyone knew an injury would alter the season. The league isn't trying to create demand from scratch. It's deliberately restraining it to see if attention redirects elsewhere. That redirection is the true gamble, betting that new storylines, expansion narratives, rising stars, and rivalries can carry the audience Clark originally brought in, building a broader base and a cleaner growth story without needing the Fever as the engine every week. If the plan fails, the fallback is clear. Late venue announcements will suddenly treat Indiana games like premium inventory, revealing the real experiment hidden in the schedule. The league is testing whether a wave of curiosity can convert into durable fandom, or if star power still drives the casual audience. Sustained growth requires more than one breakout season. It needs a media strategy that matches how fans actually consume sports. Ratings have been cited as proof, but the key detail is which broadcasts carried those numbers. Fever games repeatedly topped viewership charts, even when Clark didn't play, as fans tuned in hoping to see her return or gauge Indiana without her. This season, with fewer Indiana games in premium arenas and windows early, the league will get a clearer read on the core audience, whether viewers follow WNBA broadly or are drawn primarily by individual stars, rivalries, and storylines. The outcome is easy to frame either way, which is exactly the point. If ratings hold, the story will be that the product has matured into a property that can stand on its own. If they soften, the explanation will shift to external factors, CBA uncertainty, timing issues, scheduling noise, and then the quiet adjustments follow, late venue moves, better time slots. The same playbook seen last year when Washington and Connecticut shifted Indiana games after the calendar was already public. Right now, empty slots on the schedule quietly do a lot of work, but the real test will come as the season approaches and front offices line up projected revenue against last year's results. That's when caution turns into opportunity, scheduling becomes flexible, and obstacles that once seemed permanent suddenly look solvable. Because in pro sports, narratives matter only until the ledger disagrees. Owners can sincerely champion the idea that the league's rise is bigger than any single player, but when the choice is between a 7,000-seat arena and a 20,000-seat building, the debate quickly becomes operational. Premium seating, suites, sponsorships, and local partner activations aren't abstract. They're immediate dollars, and the gap is too large to ignore. That's why public statements from prominent stakeholders tell only half the story. People can debate recognition while still seeing exactly what a fever date does for demand, and they can push league-first messaging while reacting to a single matchup that doubles the business upside of a home game. Attendance patterns and broadcast behavior have already confirmed the Clark-driven surge is real. The true question is how the league chooses to act on that reality. Does the league fully lean in and treat its biggest draw like the biggest draw, or does it ration those moments to protect a broader narrative? Right now, the approach looks like a careful split. Claim growth isn't dependent on any one player, while reserving just enough Indiana games in upgraded venues to capture some upside. This cautious middle path helps almost no one. Fans get fewer chances to see Caitlin Clark in person, and teams that could maximize revenue with bigger buildings are asked to accept smaller gates early, effectively leaving money on the table. At the same time, the league runs a live experiment that becomes risky if numbers soften when the top draw isn't consistently in premium settings, and expansion provides cover. Toronto's rollout with multiple games in alternate venues allows the league to frame the strategy as geographic growth, not feeding a single storyline. That may be true on the surface, but it doesn't answer the central business question. Was last season a one-time spike fueled by the Clark effect? Or did she create a durable audience that stays engaged even when she isn't the weekly centerpiece? This season is designed to reveal that baseline while also giving the league built-in explanations if the numbers aren't flattering. If early attendance and viewership hold, it will be treated as proof the product has reached stability. If they fall, the league can point to timing, negotiations, or other external factors while quietly adjusting mid-season to restore the most profitable matchups to the biggest venues. That's why late winter announcements matter. Watch February and March to see who suddenly gets a path to a larger building, and how quickly practicality overrides principle when the gap between last year's receipts and this year's projections can no longer be ignored. The league is trying to prove it never needed Clark while keeping her as an emergency lever if the experiment falters. They want to sell the narrative that she arrived at the perfect moment, and that the league can keep growing regardless of how many games she plays, 13, 40, or somewhere in between. The message remains: the product is bigger than any single player. That's a confident bet, and it could pay off if the league builds a stable audience that doesn't rise and fall with one star. But there's a cost. Downshifting the most reliable draw to make a broader point risks turning what should be the most profitable season into a controlled slowdown. In pro sports, lessons about pride and narrative quickly show up in financial reports, sponsorship renewals, and owner decisions that contradict public messaging. That's why the next wave of venue and scheduling updates will be the true indicator. Watch which matchups get upgraded, which teams find space in bigger buildings, and how quickly early caution vanishes when revenue projections lag behind last year's results. The gap between what's said publicly and what happens behind the scenes will reveal whether the strategy is working, or if the market is forcing a pivot. Is this smart long-term planning to avoid over-reliance on one star, or a self-inflicted mistake that leaves money on the table for the sake of optics? The Wnba is attempting something ambitious, proving it can stand on its own, maintain record momentum, and build a true baseline audience without leaning on a single superstar as the weekly centerpiece. If it works, it's a statement of stability and product strength. If it doesn't, no speech can cover the gap between a 7,000-seat arena and a 20,000-seat building, and no talking point can replace premium revenue, corporate buy-ins, or the electricity that follows the fever into any city. In professional sports, ideology lasts only until it becomes expensive. Then reality takes the microphone, and it does so without fanfare. The most revealing truth is that you won't need a press release or official statement to understand the league's direction. You'll see it in the late venue swaps, in suddenly available NBA arenas, and in the quietly upgraded time slots. Teams don't make those changes to make a statement. They make them when they realize the original plan is leaving money on the table. That's why the next few weeks and months matter far more than any televised debate or soundbite. The schedule itself will tell the story. If early attendance and viewership hold, Leadership will claim victory and declare the league has arrived. If numbers dip, watch how quickly caution disappears and how fast fever games become premium inventory again. This season is poised to expose what the league truly believes versus what it publicly says, and once the results are in, there will be no hiding from the conclusion. For fans and insiders who want to stay ahead of the next move before the headlines catch up, following courtside leaks gives access to the updates, the backstage insights, and the unfiltered truth they won't frame honestly until forced. Every angle, every leak, every decision behind the scenes, every subtle shift in the calendar. This is where the real story unfolds. Hit like, subscribe, comment, and share to stay locked in with Courtside Leaks, your front row seat to the truth behind the WNBA headlines.